So, dear students, I welcome you to my class. And at the very outset, I like to draw your attention to the screen. I'm sharing the screen with you. Our today's topic is John Dryden's translation theory. You know, John Dryden, a very famous poet, literary critic, translator, and playwright. He was born in 1631 and he died in 1700. He was an English literature, and the literary period in which he was very much active is popularly known as the Restoration period. Restoration period started from 1660 with the ascension of Charles II to the throne of England. It's also called Neoclassical Age because during this very period, in 17th century, many writers of English literature tried to imitate the characteristics of literature and art of Roman classicists, Roman classic writers, for example, Ovid, then Dante, Virgil. So these Roman authors were very popular among the English writers of this time, and they tried to imitate many of their qualities, many of their techniques in their writings. That's why we call it Neoclassical period. Neoclassical has got a literal meaning. That is pseudo-classical period. That is not classical, but it was an imitation of classicism. Dryden also tried to imitate the Roman classic masters. And you must have heard the name of John Milton. He also followed the classic masters of Roman literature. And there was also Congreve, another English or Restoration writer. But unfortunately, Congreve or even John Dryden could not exactly imitate the Roman classical features. They could not exactly imitate. They tried to imitate, but they could not reflect them exactly in their writings. That was the reason for which we call this age a neoclassical age, because the literature which was produced during that time was not classical literature, but the art and literature at that time produced, that is during Restoration period, tried to imitate Roman classical features. That's why we call it neoclassical, not classical. This was pseudo-classical also. And this age is also called Augustan age because I think you know the name of Augustus Caesar. Augustus Caesar was one of the 11 Caesars of Roman Empire. And during his time, art and literature flourished. And many writers of this time, that is Restoration period or 17th century, tried to imitate the classical fervor of Augustan age, that is the era of Augustus Caesar. That's why we also call it Augustan period. So Dryden belonged to this period, and he was a poet, he was a satirist, he was a literary critic, he was
স্যার
also a
একটু ডিস্টার্ব
translator.
করব?
Yes,
স্যার আমি এখনো না ফার্স্ট স্লাইডটাই দেখতেছি, মানে স্লাইড চেঞ্জ করেছেন আপনি? এটা জানতে চাচ্ছিলাম।
yes.
স্যার আমি আসলে ওই মানে সেকেন্ডটা দেখতে পাইনি, তখন ওইটাই দেখছিলাম। সরি স্যার ডিস্টার্ব করার জন্য।
No, all right. Now, what about you? Can you see it?
ইয়েস স্যার।
Okay. So Dryden has got these multifarious qualities, and it is said that in the last 2 decades of his life, he translated some masterpieces and he contributed immensely to English literature. He translated basically from Latin language to English. And his translation added a new dimension to English literature. And Dryden is a very powerful literary personality. So, how powerful, you may question? It is said that before Dryden, English language could not speak, and Dryden taught English language how to speak. So just think of the implication of this statement that Dryden taught English language how to speak. So how? If you go in contact with his satires and lampoons, his satire, for example, Absalom and Achitophel, a very famous satire, and his lampoon, Macflegno. And if you read his dramas, for example, All for Love, I think you will be surprised to see how flexibly he uses English language. He can use language any way he likes. He can also rebuke in English. He can love in English. He can be very harsh in English. He can be very sweet in English. So English language finds multifarious abilities in the hands of John Dryden. So that's why it is said that English language could not speak before Dryden. And Dryden taught English language how to speak. Not only that, I think you have heard the name of Walter Scott, a very famous fiction writer. He has said that John Dryden is a glorious personality. Dryden is a glorious personality. Why? Because of his glorious contribution to English language. And another important thing that I like to mention about Dryden, that Dryden became poet laureate in 1668. You know that poet laureate is a prestigious position in the royal court. Though at the time John Milton was alive, John Milton, I think you know his name, he was born in 1608. John Milton was alive at that time, the author of Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, Samson Agonistes, etc., etc. He's undoubtedly a very glorious writer of English literature, an epic poet. He was not made the poet laureate, and it is said that Dryden was an opportunist for his sycophancy or for his sycophant nature. He could win the heart of Charles II, and that's why he was rewarded with this position. So many people believe that John Dryden, as a man, was an opportunist. As a man, he was an opportunist. He was not a good person in his personal life. But as an author, undoubtedly, he was a great, great personality. He was a great literary personality because if you read his writings, if you go in contact with his writings, I think you will be surprised at the discovery of the power, of the strength of John Dryden as an author. Though initially John Dryden was not a translator, he was basically a poet, he was a dramatist. But he became a monumental figure as a translator in 17th century. And he devoted roughly two-thirds of his poetic output to translation. As you know that he was born in 1631. And in 1680, he started translating very profusely. He was a prolific translator. So he started translating in 1680. And this very devotion to translation made him one of the most prolific and significant translators of his time. So he became one of the most prolific and significant translators of his time because of his 100% dedication to this job of translating. And he became an acclaimed translator. He translated Virgil. I think you know Virgil, a very famous Roman author, classical poet. And he translated in such a way that he became an imitable personality, an imitable translator to the successive translators. His way of translating was different. And not only that, he shifted as a translator from early literariness to paraphrase. So this very particular shift you will find in his process of translation. He did not translate word for word. He translated sense for sense, and he enjoyed liberty to a great extent for translating. Now, we may question, why did Dryden translate? Or what was the purpose of Dryden's becoming a translator? Actually, Dryden believes that translation helps him to elevate, enrich, and refine the English language. So just try to understand the purpose of his translation. He translated with a view to elevating English language to a certain height, enriching English language. Because you know that translation is an interlingual process. In a translation process, there is always intersectionality between two languages. So terms and terminologies intersect in translation process. So many words or many phrases or many terms and terminologies come from the source language to the target language. So target language becomes enriched through translation process. I think it is one of the greatest services of a translator. Suppose you are translating an Arabic text into Bengali. So many words from Arabic text or Arabic language may come to Bengali language. Just think of Kaji Nuzrul Islam, who translated Rubaiyat-e Umar Khayyam from Persian language to Bengali language. And you will find there are many Persian words, and these Persian words has become permanent assets of Bengali language. So just try to understand how translation enriches the target language. And Dryden understood it. He could realize it. With that realization, he started translation. And he also believed that translation might bring about refinement into the target language, that is English language, which was the target language to him. So these were the purposes with which Dryden started his job of a translator. Now, you know that Dryden was a poet. He was a dramatist. He was a literary critic. Now, what did he say about translation? Or what did he express his idea about the necessity of translation? Dryden translated some epistles. Epistles means letters. And these letters were written by Ovid, another Latin author. Ovid, a poet. And these epistles were written in couplet, heroic couplet. And Dryden translated these epistles. And in the preface, he categorized translation into 3 types in the preface. Okay. So in the preface, he mentions 3 categories of translation. One is metaphrase. Metaphrase means word for word translation. Then the second one, paraphrase. And the third one, imitation. Now, what is Ovid's epistle? It is imagined that the letters that Ovid had written in the form of couplets, these letters were written by some mythological women. Penelope, the wife of Odysseus or Ulysses, and Dido. Dido was the beloved of Aeneas. So it is said that it is a belief that has come from mythology that these women used to write letters to their lovers, imaginary lovers, or their lovers, or their husbands or lovers. So these epistles were actually love letters written in the form of couplet, in the form of very rhymed and musical lines. And Dryden chose these Latin epistles. Epistles means letters, remember. So he translated these epistles into English language. And in the introduction, in the preface, he explained why he chose epistles for translation. And he also mentioned three categories of translation: metaphrase, paraphrase, and imitation. And Ovid's epistles can, in many ways, be said to mark a turning point in John Dryden's literary career. So that was the beginning of Dryden as a translator. And there is a background, there is an occasion why Dryden suddenly turned into a translator from a poet. So the history is that when the young publisher, Jacob Tunson, approached him to contribute to a miscellany edition of Ovid translations, Dryden was at that time at the height of his poetic career. He was a poet laureate too. He was a great critic. So Ovid's epistles that Dryden translated marks at once the beginning of Dryden's late and prolific career. It is said that Dryden started his career as a translator from 1680, and this very particular piece of literature, that is Ovid's epistles, were his first translation enterprise. Now let's come to know some important terms and terminologies. The categories of translations that Dryden has mentioned. What is metaphrase? As I have already mentioned, that metaphrase is a word-for-word translation. And the term metaphrase was first used by Philo Judaeus in 20 BCE, that is 20 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. In his book, De Vita Moses, Quintilian draws a distinction between metaphrase and paraphrase in the pedagogical practice of imitations and reworking of classical texts. And he points out that metaphrase changes the word, and paraphrase, a phrase or distinction that is also followed by Renaissance scholars. So metaphrase means word-for-word translation, literal translation. You need not think of the connotations. You need not think of the silence that you have learned from Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak. There is a negotiation between two words, and this negotiation produces new meanings, connotations, suggestiveness. If you think of all those things while translating a text, then that would be a paraphrase. But if you don't care about all these things, if you care about the literal meaning of the word only, then that very translation will be known as metaphrase. Okay. And the second one is paraphrase. Paraphrase means sense for sense translation. As I have already mentioned, if you go back to Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak, logic, rhetoric, silence, logic, that is the conscience of the writer is incorporated into his text. The writer has got his belief, he has got his ideas, he has got his mindset, and all these things are incorporated into his writings. That is called logic, the relevance of the writing. And another thing, that is rhetoric, stylistics of a writing. A writing is usually beautified. A writing becomes melodious, sweet, if some specific styles are maintained in a writing. That is called rhetorics. And then silence. Silence means the hidden meanings. That is, words are always negotiating and producing or generating meanings. Meanings never stop. The meanings that you call confirmed today may not be confirmed tomorrow. The meanings that is widely accepted today may not be accepted tomorrow. So meanings always keep changing. So if you are a good translator, if you want to follow this paraphrase, that is this very technique of translation, then you have to think of all those things. You have to consider all those things related to the text, source text. And you have to think of the target reader's expectation. You should have the potential to feel the pulse of your readers. And if you can align these two, then I think your translation will be a paraphrase. And Dryden prefers paraphrase. He thinks paraphrase should be the most appropriate process of translation, and he followed it in his job of translating. And the third category of translation is imitation. Imitation, as defined by John Dryden, is a free, creative approach to translation or adaptation, where the translator adapts the original text, abandoning a strict adherence to the words or sense to write as the original author might have in contemporary context. Adaptation, for example, you were reciting a drama. After recitation of the drama, you made a film. Or suppose you are reciting a fiction. After recitation, you transform it and made it a drama. So this is called adaptation. This is neither metaphrase nor paraphrase. In metaphrase and paraphrase, the text does not change its genre. The text closely remain faithful to the source text. That is, the target text remains faithful to the source text. But in imitation, even genre changes. Why? Because the author considers the contexts, he considers the factors that usually impact the target readers and the source text. So as he compromises with all these things, it becomes imitation. But Dryden prefers metaphrase, that is sense post sense translation. Now, what is Dryden's attitude towards target audience? Suppose we are the readers of translation. You are a translator. So what should be your attitude towards us? We, the readers of translation. Dryden believed the translator must keep the audience's pleasure in mind, translating in a way that feels natural in the target language. That is, you have to translate in such a way that you are translating for the pleasure of the target readers. You are not translating for you, for yourself. You are translating for the readers. So you should have the capacity to read the psychology of your readers. You have to have the potential to observe the situations among which your target audience is living. So you have to align their target, you have to align their objective, their expectation with your task of translation. So I think in this way, Dryden is great because he puts emphasis on the taste, expectations, and desires of the target readers or target audience. Now, what is Dryden's suggestion to a translator? What does he suggest to a translator, or what does he advise to a translator? Dryden speaks in favor of the liberty of a translator. So Dryden says that translation is a job that is to be done with 100% ease, comfort. A translator is not a very strict person. A translator should have a liberal mind. He maintains balance of liberties. Liberty does not mean anarchy. Liberty means controlled use of your comfort. You want to celebrate your comfort or happiness. Okay, celebrate it. But you must not disturb the other people. That is called liberty. Dryden believes that a translator should have the liberty, and he will make a balance between what his audience wants from him and what the source text says. He must not be deviated from the root. He must not distort the source text, but he must not be very much literal or very much rigid, because too much rigidity makes his translation dry. So, where the translator maintains the author's voice while utilizing the flexibility of their own language. That is, the translator must remain dedicated to the voice of the author. At the same time, he will use his own language. So I am using my language to carry the voice of my author, that is, the author of the source text, to my audience. This is called balanced liberty. That is, I must be flexible. I must be liberal. At the same time, I must maintain the voice of the source writer. I must not distort the voice of the source writer. That's important. So I think these are very nuanced points that you must think very critically. Now, what is the goal of translation? What does Dryden say about the goal of translation? What does translation do? Why should we translate? Why do we need translation? So, a bunch of questions visit our mind, and we try to know the answers to these questions. Dryden himself answers to these questions. The first one, what should be the goal of translation? Dryden believes that the goal of translation is to transport the spirit and the poetic quality of the original work, not just its words. So again, Dryden clarifies that he is not in favor of metaphrase. He is in favor of paraphrase. That is, you are translating not the words. A translator's job is not a transformative job. It is the job of a carrier. You are carrying the voice, you are carrying the message of the original work to your target readers. That's important. You are not distorting a text. You are not transforming. You are just carrying. You are carrying, you are bearing the message of the source text to the target readers. Now, Dryden has given an example. We can find lots of examples in Dryden's poetic or poetic translations. How does Dryden enjoy liberty in translation process? We may question, or we may try to know what Dryden himself has done while translating. Dryden's experiences while preparing the translations included the satires of Juvenal and Persius, clearly convinced him that even farther freedoms were legitimate. So Dryden believes in freedom while translating. When rendering such densely elusive, topical, and difficult writers as the Roman satirists, suppose you are translating a difficult writer, lots of allusions are there, lots of references are there, then what will you do? You can compromise with your liberty. You can use liberty. You need not translate for word for word. You have to translate sense for sense. His method in this volume, he says, has been a kind of paraphrase or somewhat, yet more loose, betwixt a paraphrase and imitation, in which he and his collaborators have even allowed themselves occasionally to make Juvenal express the customs and manners of our native country rather than of Rome. So it's a very important point. You are a Bangladeshi translator. You are translating an English text. You belong to Bangladeshi culture, but the source text belongs to English culture. So what will you do? You have to domesticize that very text. Suppose you are describing the love-making scene between two English persons or personality, that is one lover and one beloved. So you have to create a situation in such a way that the Bangladeshi readers will feel that, okay, this is a love-making scene. So love is universal. So just think of the universality of your text. And at the same time, you have to think of the subjective tone and voice of the writer. If you can bring these two together harmoniously, then you can be a good translator. And Dryden has done it in his translations. Now, how can we evaluate Dryden as our translator? Dryden, to be sure, remained broadly true throughout his translating career to many of the principles set out when introducing his first work as a translator in 1680. But those principles were continually and sometimes radically modified in response to the challenge of specific tasks. And in the light of the poet's deepening thoughts about the nature of literature, of literary tradition, and of life itself. So, what do you gather from this very text? That is, while you are translating, you should follow some principles, some rules, some rubrics. Otherwise, your translation may be misleading. But Dryden suggests, while translating, while doing this job of translation for your target audience, sometimes, if necessary, you may compromise with the rules and rubrics. You must not be very strict. You must not be very uncompromising. Sometimes you need to compromise. Then your translation may be widely acceptable, otherwise not. So I think while you evaluate Dryden as a translator, you can derive some guidelines for you. If you are a translator, you can also follow these principles that Dryden has followed as a translator during his career.
Okay, sir.
So I think you have got some important points. And if you read these contents repeatedly, I think you can have some guidelines for you as translators. So now if you have any question, you may ask me questions. I'm waiting for your questions. Do you have any question? No question?